Well, thank you for joining us at the Beagle and Child. Please do grab a seat and a pint of something or other. I'm joined here. I'm Joel Davidson, by the way, but I'm joined here by Henry Canine, Philip Stankus, and Nathan McBride. And we are gathered here to discuss a short story called Triceratops by the Japanese science fiction and mystery author Kono Tensei. And I wish I had more background information on the author, Kono Tensei, than I do. I did a little bit of reading up before this. I know that he was of course, a Japanese author, did some work in television, wrote mystery novels, and kind of transitioned into sort of the science fiction space with the popular Japanese magazine SF, which I'd heard of before, a monolithic publication over there. But other than that, I haven't read any other stories by this author, Kono Tensei. I don't really know much of anything about his career aside from what I just told you, or about his life or anything like that. So we really are, I think, unless you guys did some impressive research and reading that I didn't do. Um, we're going to be coming to this pretty raw, just kind of focusing on the story itself, our impressions of it, and those things. You may be wondering then, since I know so little about kind of the background of the story, how did I read it? And that is something I can tell you quite a bit about because I encountered this, as I think a lot of Westerners and Americans did. I encountered it in an amazing science fiction anthology called The World Treasury of Science Fiction. This is a great book. It was put out in hardcover. It's a thick book. It's edited by David G. Hartwell, who is a very important editorial force in science fiction. I know and love him as Gene Wolfe's editor for quite a while. I believe he edited Book of the New Sun as Wolfe was writing it, and he did an amazing job selecting the stories in here. It's called The World Treasury of Science Fiction. Um, and it contains stories, as the title would suggest, from all over the world. But what's interesting is it is a mix of everywhere. You know, there's a lot of stuff from the English-speaking world, especially the US. But there's a lot of stuff in here in translation from authors, you know, you've heard of Stanislaw Lem. Borges is in here as well, Jorge Luis Borges, Italo Calvino, and I'm just kind of looking at the table of contents here to refresh my memory. Yeah, the Strugatsky brothers have a story in here. I just wanted to make sure that was the case. Yeah, so people from all over the world. It is a long book. It's about 1,000 pages. But even if you just took the American stuff from the book, it would be an excellent, pretty sizable collection. And it's stuff from inside and outside the field too. You have your classics. You know, you have Martian Odyssey, Forgetfulness by John W. Campbell Jr. is in here. Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. So there's some real classics in this collection that kind of are frequently anthologized. But you have some quirky stuff too. You have Avram Davidson's The Golem, which is a really quirky, fun little story that I haven't seen in a ton of collections. There's a really great Robert Sheckley story called Ghost 5, which is in many ways a precursor to Ghostbusters, kind of a science fiction-y version of Ghostbusters set on a haunted planet. It is very funny as well. And yeah, so it kind of runs the gamut. It's not just the monolithic classics of the genre. It's a really excellent broad collection. It pulls stuff from Italy, from what was then the Soviet Union, and South America and Europe and Asia, all over the place. It's a really excellent collection. I found so many stories in here and authors that I really came to love. I think this was the first place that I read a Gene Wolfe story as well. The novella version of Fifth Head of Cerberus is in here, which is amazing, and it was quite mind-blowing to read it. So all that to say, among this kind of international murderer's row of science fiction stories was this very short story called Triceratops by an author I'd never heard of named Kono Tensei, and it really affected me. So I wanted to subject these fine gentlemen to it as well. with kind of that background out of the way, and a strong recommendation that you track down and pick up this anthology, World Treasury of Science Fiction. Nathan, would you mind just kind of giving us a brief gloss on the story of Triceratops?
Yes, I'd be glad to. Well, it's in Japan. It's a Japanese writer. I believe it's in Japan. And a father and son are going home on their bicycles. They stop at an intersection, and this thing lumbers by in front of them. It seems to be an animal, very large, much bigger than a bull, thick tail. And then when they look, they can't see it. So they go on home, tell the boy's mother about it, but nothing on the news or anything. That evening, they can hear it out their window when they look, and sure enough, it's a Triceratops. They follow it, but then it just kind of merges into this, fades into this wall, and so the next day they get up and go about their lives, and they start seeing it again. They start seeing more of them, and they don't really tell other people because they know that unless they saw it for themselves, it'd be pretty hard to convince anybody they weren't just making something up. So but they're open to seeing what all they might find, and as it goes along, they see more and more of these Triceratops, especially some other dinosaurs, and then they discover that there's like one in every house. It's sort of an interdimensional thing. It's as if they can feel the warmth. So there's not really any interaction between them and the dinosaurs, but they see them more and more, and it climaxes with this encounter with these Tyrannosaurus rexes that come, and there's a large battle they witness between them and the Triceratops. A great deal of blood, and yeah, that's about it. They've discovered this other dimension of their world, and there's not much else that happens, but it's a very compelling story.
Yeah, very much so. And thanks for that summary. It is it is a very short story, and even as short as it is, the narrative is pretty slender. But within that, there's a lot of atmosphere and a lot of subtext and a lot of things going on, I think, just under the surface and unspoken. So I'm curious, what were your guys' first impressions reading this one?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me both in the first time reading this and then just now we recapped it through for this podcast was a kind of a sense of coziness throughout it. Um, bearing the violence at the end, which is quite brutal. What I mean is that the main characters are never in any danger. They're really just kind of seeing these things play out as almost like holograms or kind of like watching a movie, but it's a movie that they're within, that they're able to bike through and travel, and like they're kind of following these creatures around, but they're never in any danger. And I quite like just the comfortableness of like the father and the son kind of on this little secret mission of a sort. So you have the mother often saying like, what are you two up to? And they just kind of grin and run off and do their thing. So there is a kind of like innocence and comfortableness within it, and of course just that wonder of seeing these massive creatures and seeing that both as a little boy and just kind of that massive powerful these like friendly giants going by, and then you have the perspective of the father, which is a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more wizened, but all the same impressed by these apparitions. And it's very nice that there's no conflict between the two. It's like, oh, you saw it, you didn't really see it, but the father's actually quite open to trust his eyes and to trust the witness of his own son. He knows he's not mad because the two of them saw it, and he's very frank about explaining, why people um, might try to dismiss it to themselves. There's a little paragraph here that says, maybe if you know how people's heads are, we try to deny things that we think are impossible. It's a kind of protective instinct. So even if we somehow do see it or feel it, we usually just shut it out automatically, choose not to see it, not to do it. If we see it again, two, three times maybe, then common sense comes to the rescue and we laugh it off. Nerves. Boy, what a crazy idea. and that's the end of it. And the son replies, and if it still doesn't stop, then people stop accepting you. You can't live a productive social life anymore. So what I like about that is it kind of acknowledges the what would be the conflict in like most kind of modern films where, the kid sees this dinosaur and nobody believes him, but the father's just kind of like explaining that is the usual reaction, but it never goes there. It's never part of the drama. It's just this little shared secret between the two of them. So that relationship, mixed with the wonder of it, is one of the strongest impressions I got on these first couple of reads.
Right, and wonder is a fine word to use. I think this story that's something that I felt too when I first read the story. Certainly wonder, but it was very interesting. The words cozy and wonder, I think, are very appropriate. It's the sense of something, of course, wonderful, majestic, and just incredibly beyond our day-to-day experiences, breaking in, but not necessarily to overturn everything, at least not all at once. It's there, and it's kind of kept like a secret, this wonder and of seeing, of seeing these creatures and the giganticness of it all is sort of boiled down into a little secret between father and son, and everything, the story and everything is really, it's hashed out in the conversations between father and son, who still go about their daily lives. I think it's the end of, or the day after they see the Triceratops for the first time. The narrator makes a point that, father and son leave the house at the same time, father to go to work, son to go to school. Life still goes on for them, but their internal worlds have changed and can never be the same again. And their relationship is certainly deepened, and it's given a new aspect to it. And they both have very important things to contribute to the conversation. It's not as if the son is not completely helpless and the father's not completely helpless. They both have the perspective of youth is just as important as the perspective of old age or older, of old age and wisdom. In a way, the best way to summarize that, it was fun. It was a fun story, and not in a, sort of a diminutive way where, we can say like there's no substance to it. It was there for a good laugh, and oh well, off to the next one. Not fun in that sort of way, but it was. There's certainly adventure, it's a good time, but at the same time, it leaves you with a whole lot to a great deal to think about. It's very poignant as well and sad, and it doesn't shirk away from. And I'm glad that Kono Tensei did us the kindness and paid us the respect of not shying away from the hard truths, the bitter truths of that wonderful world of the dinosaurs that in this, in our day and age, and also in the day and age of the main characters had passed away. Seem, or at least they, we think that it has. They thought that it had, but maybe the story's trying to tell us that maybe our thoughts and perceptions on time could use a little tweaking, maybe. And so, I'm glad for the experience of this story. It's wonderful, and I'm excited to read it again.
I liked how it was, there are a lot of those sci-fi fantasy kids on bike stories. This one's kind of a father and son on bike. And it had a little bit of that something wicked this way comes charm with that special sort of family relationship in the midst of everything.
Yeah, I think one thing that stuck out to me on this reread of the story is that it contains all those elements, right? The family component, that sense of wonder and adventure, that child's eye perspective, and of course, just this wonderful notion of being out on a bicycle and seeing dinosaurs in your town. But there's not an ounce of condescension in the story. There's wonder in it, but it's not saccharine. There's pain in it, but it's not, I would say, overly cynical. You know, you could say that it has some cynicism in it, but it doesn't fall prey to either extreme. The relationship between the father and son, Phil, you had highlighted how it's they trust each other, and in another story like this, you know, maybe it would just be the son seeing it and not being able to convince the adults.
It's done so many times.
Right, exactly, exactly. Or you know, I think there's also another version of this too, which would kind of go more of the. I mean, this is a great movie, but just for this example, like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the dad, you know, sees it or has this experience, and he becomes, you know, obsessed. And if you were stretching this out to like the length of a novel, or adapting it into a feature-length film, you know, those are probably directions you would go in.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no like family falling apart because of this. There's no rift
mhm,
that comes about it. And Nathan mentioned he was pretty sure that this is supposed to be a Japanese family, um, because of the Japanese author. I think there's another clue is that when they're having dinner, he describes them using chopsticks. So I think that's pretty clear that this is what we're meant to picture. Um, and I have noticed in many stories and films, or many Japanese stories and films, when that the father, like there is kind of I think it's just part of the culture that there's kind of a steadiness to the father, like not getting very like overly emotional but when things come their way, but he's trying to be kind of like the head of the family and kind of direct things. Um,
mhm.
and I think he does have like especially in this one, he does have that steadiness, and he's just taking it seriously, and he's not like overstating what he thinks or understating it. He's just being very plain with his son and being able to confide information that he knows that he would be able to understand, and treating him with um, a lot of respect and kind of honor in that way as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good relationship, but an understated one. And even the father's steadiness in the story has its limits because after the
Yes.
the mother and the son go to bed, you know, he's saturating himself with whiskey and
Yes.
but
I was going
also
to point that out. I was going
indeed,
to, I'm
yeah,
glad you,
Well,
and I
well,
mean,
that's true,
hey,
but that's behind closed doors, right?
hmm
That's when the
right.
family isn't witnessing it, then he can let a little bit of that kind of pressure out that
yeah.
way.
But he's
And
also
there's,
not trashing the house and being like, you know, having an externally, violent crisis. He's just processing it in a way that's
Mhm.
obviously seems to be hard on him. But the story is kind of dealing with that in an understated way. It never abandons the coziness of the world that Kono Tensei is set up to give us those kind of peeks inside the characters'
I,
minds.
I do quite like the description um he gives of that scene when he's like having the drink. It says like the alcohol seeped through every cell of his aching muscles, slowly tanning his exhausted body like leather.
Mhm. And it's a great way of not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a flaw in the character. He doesn't drink so much that he goes into a rage or go berserk or anything, but it's a wonderful bit of humanity and you know, uh, makes me relate to him. I don't go in much for whiskey either, but if there's ever a time for a good glass or two, it would be, running into a Triceratops on the way home,
Hmm
while driving or riding on a bicycle. It's like, yeah, yeah, break out the
Take the
bottle there, champ.
take
Yeah,
the
You've
edge
you've
off.
earned it. Yeah, you've earned it. For such a time as this, we have whiskey cabinets. And that was
yeah, indeed.
that's wonderful.
And it's I think too there's an aspect of the story where, you know, for sure it could go too far the other way, and, you know, everybody's going to therapy or everybody's yelling at each other and destroying the house because they can't take the forbidden knowledge. But there's also, I think, if this scene wasn't there, I think I would feel a little bit disoriented, like, okay, why aren't they responding more to this incredible thing that they've seen?
Hmm.
And the fact that Kono Tensei acknowledges that
Hmm.
without overplaying his hand or changing what the story is, it is really masterful.
Yeah, and just like that scene, that little paragraph I read earlier in the recording of him acknowledging kind of the people hiding these things. It's like he was hitting all the like hiding these things from themselves even. Like he's hitting all the beats and he's dealing with it very elegantly and saying, well, this isn't about that. It's about something else. Yeah, it helps a lot with that's maintaining the suspension of disbelief and being able to buy the story and buy the characters because it's like okay, well we settled that little tick, but we're going to move on to something a little bit more wondrous and a little more and grander than those little things. So I do have a question. What do you make of the Triceratops as like each kind of belonging to a single home on the street?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I think the first time I read the story years ago, that aspect of it kind of washed over me. Like I wasn't really, um, I don't even know if I was completely aware of that relationship that exists. Because the whole manifestation of the dinosaurs even being there is strange. Because it's Nathan, I think you had pointed out, it's kind of like a hologram or something. They don't interact with the dinosaurs directly, physically. They see them, they hear them. The dinosaurs can kind of phase through walls and this kind of stuff. It seems like they're not tied in. But at the same time, there's also a very odd note, a couple of odd notes towards the beginning of the story, where it reads, "A huge shadow darted across the intersection no more than 5 or 6 meters away, shaking the very earth as it passed. It had the feeling of mass, of power, of a bulldozer, of a 10-ton truck." So even here, there's a physical manifestation of the Triceratops's presence in the scene. So it may not even be entirely non-physical, although it definitely seems that it's not really there in the same way that everything else is there. And I think there's also a strange reference to pollen later, oh goodness, let's see if I can find that one. And I think, Phil, I'm just muddying up your question. I'm not actually responding to it in any meaningful way, but I'm just trying to get to the bottom of the fact that just the strangeness of the dinosaur's manifestation.
No,
Um,
I think that is important because it's all part of the nature of the thing. Um, One thought that I had is the fact that this is, in the timeline, like millions of years in the future, where the the kid and the father are, the dinosaurs having all died out, they've they've essentially become, they became bones and those, they became these corpses. The corpses dissolved, the they became like part of the sediment. And, having the Triceratops kind of merging into the wall and disappearing into the wall. I wonder like if there's something there where like the materials that the town has been built out of um is in some ways like using this long decayed material, like that the dinosaurs are there around them and around us in that way because we're kind of feeding off, like the trees that we cut down to build, for the timber inside of our own houses were fed on by carbon in the earth that the Triceratops has, left for us, and it's been nourishing that, and now we have a little bit of that inside of our own abodes. So like maybe it's something there where it's like each house has like it is the Triceratops material.
hmm.
Um,
And I wonder too, like thinking about it along those lines, I didn't think about this till you just mentioned that. Is there like an animism sort of aspect to it as well, like related to Shinto or something about,
Hmm.
where the dinosaurs are, this is where people have decided to build their houses. Like there's a strong connection between like the life force, the land, uh, where people are living and kind of honoring the space, that kind of idea.
It could very well be.
Right, right. Almost like it's the idea of kami, right? Where
Right.
every object, every place, to one extent or another um has a spirit, has a spirit of it, or the spirit of the place. And it's probably going taking a step down from the mystical to into the literary, but it is a nice thought that, a family living together, working together, and loving one another, is just as, in its own way, just as strong and powerful and enduring as a Triceratops. That thought.
Yeah. And
And
that
there are
time.
three in the family. There's the mother, the father, and the
Oh,
son,
Oh,
and three
yeah,
horns.
that's
there
interesting.
you
Yeah,
go.
that's interesting.
Excellent point. Yes.
Yeah, and that love, Henry, that you were kind of talking about, like or kind of the life force of the family, their work, their play, all of that stuff. There's nothing in the story to maybe outright state this, but that could flow forwards in time, like we're seeing the boy and the father seeing the manifestations of the Triceratops, but there's no way of denying that the possibility that that could flow backwards in time as well. The Triceratops may be attracted to the warmth of the domestic setting, that will be there.
Right. Wonderful. And in its way, it's almost as if the coziness of the that day to day, that tranquil, life in the human family is almost, in that way, it's almost as if that is the afterlife for the Triceratops.
Hmm.
That it's happy to, that's glad to, almost in a way give up its life in order to join. It's that theme of interconnectedness, um, and finding very large things, very small things, and vice versa. It runs through this story all throughout, I think, and it never ceases to be a surprise. Even when the father and son understand what's going on, they have this mutual understanding only between themselves, but they also know that they can't really share with anyone else. So they've kind of gone into a sort of, they quickly assimilate these sightings as, back into their domestic normalcy, kind of. Even then, after that, there's still all kinds of, surprises that, turn up from it. And it's incredible, incredible that way, that interplay between, those ideas.
Hey, my room's in its butt.
Right. That's what it is.
And then the dad responds by saying, "Don't let it get to you."
Right. Oh my goodness. Right. And yeah, that just what a gem. What a gem of a conversation.
Yes.
It could
Speaking
not
of
it could not be otherwise. It could not be otherwise.
speaking of gems, there's just this one description that he gives. It's probably my favorite paragraph in the whole story, about this whole relationship between the Triceratops and the houses. A Triceratops huddled superimposed over every house of the town, their skin brilliant green beneath the mercury lamps, gently rising and falling with their breathing. Occasionally one would open its eyes in a narrow slit, and every time the lids raised, the pupils would glitter in brilliant rose, perhaps because of rhodopsin pigment like that found in some species of crocodile. It was a scene of phantasmal beauty, like the winking of giant fireflies. Just it's gorgeous, and wondrous.
Indeed.
Yeah, totally, totally. And at the same time, not overwritten. Like there's
No,
yeah,
no.
that's the understated kind of warmth and beauty of this story,
Mhm.
coming through in the prose.
Which is also rather Japanese.
Yes, for sure.
I could definitely see like a connection between kind of the family life and the Triceratops and kind of their peacefulness and these sort of good giant forces. When the Tyrannosauruses come in, I wouldn't want to pin that down to like any one like particular figure, like just like or just like turn it into an allegory for something else. But I think there are forces that can come upon, these kind of peaceful families and cause destruction and for seemingly no reason. But I think it's nice that he doesn't really make it like explicit like what that is. It's just this is just a force that comes. These are just these two kind of elemental forces, and like different people can inhabit those roles at any time.
Yeah, and that kind of takes us to sort of a big picture question, which I want to ask you guys. But before I do that, before we get into that, I wanted to just do one quick rabbit trail and ask you guys what you think about the television in the story, because really, like, this is very much a story about we've got bicycles, okay, we've got family, we've got just like the Fast and the Furious. It's all about family, and
Mhm.
yeah, so bicycles, we've got family, we've got uh, dinosaurs. But the other big element in the story, I guess you could add whiskey to the pile, and then television. The family's watching television. There's a lot of a fair amount of the word count in this very short story is spent describing the singing competition on the TV and the singer blowing her nose and that coming back again. The father is watching the TV and then falls asleep, and then while there's static on the television, he hears the dinosaur, roaring outside, the Triceratops outside. It keeps coming back to the TV. What's up with that, guys? What do you think?
Well, I'll venture forth a little bit here. I'm probably off the mark here, but I think it kind of goes along with the theme of time in a way, just as the Triceratops anchors distant past, the TV kind of anchors the family in, not only in their present time, but from the perspective of the dinosaurs, in that distant future also. It's an important an emblem, a marker of in the sense of the advance of technology, whether that's good or bad. I don't know if the story really addresses that. If it's good or bad, it probably has the potential for both because while on the one hand it provides, sort of more domestic coziness for the family, they gather around to enjoy TV shows together. The mother is sort of, she's very much transfixed to it. She's very much attached to television, and I can't remember, but I don't think she gets to see the dinosaurs, uh,
Correct. Yeah.
right? And it's kind of it's kind of a sad trade-off there, where
Remember that, kids. If you stay all day playing video games and watching TV, you won't see the dinosaurs.
that's it could be, that could be an implication of that. Like I said, it can be a force for either good or bad, as are the dinosaurs themselves, right? It's not all, sure, we'll talk about it more later on, or coming up. It's not all tranquil. It's beautiful and majestic, but it's terrifying as well, in the sense that, history, he's always had that violence, at least in the story. It's saying, it's always been there, whether it's on the TV, now that people are watching TV and getting a lot of violence from watching it, or, experiencing it the way the dinosaurs did. I think perhaps it can be a kind of a symbol to show both how much has changed, how much has changed, but also how much things are the same as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and it could also just be a Henry, that connection you drew between the TV and the dinosaurs. I think that that's at base level probably, at least modestly a connection that we can draw is that the dinosaurs and the skimpily clad Eurasian girl on the TV are kind of the same thing in a way. Just one is
Hmm.
separated from the Japanese family by time, and one is separated from the Japanese family by space.
Right.
She's somewhere else doing this variety show, but in both cases, there's an
with
effect.
voices that are strange to them. Like they don't know what she means when she's singing, and it's described. Yeah, it's just like she sang, almost howled in a strange voice. So it's describing her almost like creaturely.
hmm
Mhm.
and
It's
the
a
father gets those confused later. He's
right.
not sure if he's hearing somebody blowing their nose or hearing the dinosaur. And yeah, but both do have an effect, even though there is that distance. That effect could be distraction. That effect could be humor. The mother is laughing at the performer. And then the father and son are going to be first in wonder of and then in horror at the dinosaurs. So these things are not physically present in the here and now, but they are still having a tangible effect on the here and now. I wonder, well, this might be kind of getting into the next question I wanted to throw out there, but does anybody have anything else on the TV bit before we move on?
Yeah, so I don't think he's necessarily trying to make like a kind of like a moralistic thing going on here, or like TV bad, dinosaurs good, or something.
Right.
Um, I think it is the TV is linked with the family dinner, which like especially like when I was growing up, um, around kind of through the late 90s and early 2000s, that kind of was what families did. You would have these kind of TV dinners that you would watch something together while you ate. And like that was a kind of very homey and kind of action to do and a way to share. And I think there's a way in which I don't know, it feels almost like with the Triceratops, kind of going back to the Triceratops being kind of one to each home and seeing the kind of the brutality that they have to go through, like the at the end of the story, and this is very like bloody deaths. It's almost like we're able to have that safety and security, to be able to watch, silly things on TV and eat dinner with our family and have an enjoyable time and laugh, in part because of that that sacrifice like of the earlier periods and like all these violent things that had to go on beforehand so that we could have these moments of peace. So I don't think he's, and again, I'm not trying to say that he's being like moralistic, like you should be using your time better or something like that. No, I think it's just that is kind of the precursor of it, and in a way to, another reason to, be thankful for the kind of the prosperity and safe security that we feel today.
Yeah, and that since you mentioned that cultural element, growing up the family dinner around the TV, sort of growing up in the late 90s, the story was written around the mid 70s,
Sure.
where that culture was kind of newer but still there. I think it's interesting in the first paragraph, it describes where they live. On the way back, they had been forced to burrow through the exhaust and dust of the national highway before finally reaching the residential area a mile from home. Their house lay beyond this slightly aging neighborhood on the other side of the small hill in the new subdivision. So they live in the new subdivision. Yeah, having their TV dinner and watching the television. But I think it's interesting. It seems they're actually moving from an old neighborhood to their newer, more updated neighborhood. And it's here in this transitional space, going from old to new, that they see the Triceratops for the first time.
That's a very good catch.
I don't know. It just popped into my head because I was
Yeah.
thinking about like well TV and the new neighborhood, and then I was like, oh, he makes a point of saying they're going from an aging neighborhood on their bicycles, and that's when they see it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that sort of dynamic stuck out to me, though I didn't notice it there. I noticed it at the end when it was describing the playground and how it was built over this river, and they look down into the grate and see the Triceratops running.
Right.
Is this sense of the present being built on the past, but they coexist.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a very fascinating, like we had said before, there's the story's so kind of understated and straightforward on the surface that I think some of these things on a first read or even a second or third read can kind of pass by unnoticed. But it's there's a lot going on here as you start to excavate, if you'll pardon
Right.
the paleontological pun. I guess if we're good on the TV aspect, I wanted to pose a question to you, gentlemen, and it's one that really I'd like to explore that final section of the story because there's a lot there. The story has been kind of subtle and pleasant up till now, but in the final section, the Tyrannosaurus Rex appears in force, great numbers, and there's this big battle, this bloody battle that kills the Triceratopses and the Tyrannosaurus Rexes. And it's described in pretty grisly detail. Up till now, the story's been, yeah, had that sort of domestic quality, and now we're getting like ripped flesh and guts hanging out and eating and goring and all of these horrific images that the father and son are witnessing.
It's worse than the rite of spring sequence in Fantasia.
It is, yeah. Yeah, you can imagine that music though, playing over this devastation for sure.
Oh gosh, the sacrifice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Q Stravinsky, but yeah, but I guess to kind of complicate that even more, I want to get your guys' thoughts on the story's conclusion and why it concludes on that note. But I want to read a little bit from David Hartwell's introduction. This is his introduction to Triceratops. Science fiction in Japan began in the 1960s as an offshoot of American science fiction. He's talking about literature here. Obviously, there were, movies before this, but as kind of a literary movement with conventions where fans gathered, a major magazine, Hayakawa's SF magazine, and a wave of translations from English. But what developed was unlike the literature of the West and more like the Japanese sci-fi films of the 1950s and early 1960s, full of monsters and disasters. This story combines the fascination with monsters and a sensibility akin to that of Jorge Luis Borges, or the magic realists, or perhaps early Ballard. As is common with Japanese SF, there is not the kind of narrative force or plot to hold the story together that we expect in Western literature. Instead, there is a succession of set pieces leading to a culminating image, in this case, one that has striking, perhaps even disturbing political undertones. This is a story about war. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think we were kind of dancing around this a little bit earlier. Like I don't want to draw like a direct like allegory saying the Tyrannosaurus Rex is this or that nation. Maybe if I was more familiar with the context of what was going on historically in Japan at the time that it was written, maybe there would be an actor that shows up. Like, but I think it works as this kind of universal force of like there's an aggressor, and then there can be a large number of aggressors, and then there are a large number of people who are just trying to live their lives and be peaceful and uh maintain that. And the war affects both of them, and both get destroyed in the end. And like I'm not trying to be morbid, but like we're all gonna be gone from at least from this earth eventually. And I guess seeing this as kind of a warning, like this is what happened to your ancestors. Don't let it happen to you. Like I could see that being a little bit of a message there.
There's, I think, with the final scenes, the last battle, shall we say? Um, so we can have to throw in an Inklings reference there.
Obligatory.
Um, always. I just want to take a minute just again to compliment the author. Kono Tensei, because it's very much, of course, this story. It's very compact. Our listeners and who've read it or are going to read it, they'll see it. That it doesn't take very long to read through this story. However, he manages to profoundly and accurately and artistically pack so much into it. And the idea of, it's war and peace, right? Um, he managed even to properly, respectfully treat that gigantic topic, even with this short amount of space. And you can draw parallels. If you want to think of Japan, you can look at conflicts between Japan and other countries, and also conflicts within Japan itself. With this fight between the Triceratops and the Tyrannosaurus, you can even switch out Japan at this point, right? It's that profound. It's that well written. Each country could benefit from and relate to the experiences in this
That's what I think
story.
makes it so good is that
Yeah.
it's completely universal. It's
Yes.
not like one nation or one king or one president or whatever. It's not like this specific thing I don't like. It's just a monster. It's
Hmm.
just it's a group of monsters coming in, and it's like when a story is written well and like when there is a good message behind it, it's like real life reflects that pattern. It's
Hmm.
like you read it back, like we can see monsters today, or we can see monsters in different ages, but like the truth of it is the monster. It's not just one particular figure.
And I think
Right.
you can see it play out in a worse way too. Like imagine we were talking about the TV earlier. Imagine that it wasn't a variety show on TV. It was news footage from the war in Vietnam, which would have been going on when the story was published in 74, just winding down. But you imagine if that was what was on TV. Imagine if the Tyrannosaurus Rexes were shown as the aggressors and the Triceratopses are sort of helplessly ripped apart or whatever. I think that the fact that Kono Tensei kind of takes that route of yes, the T-Rexes are advancing, they're attacking, but it's actually not clear who sort of starts the conflict because where it starts is you have the T-Rexes moving down and the father and son realize, oh, this is bad, something's going to go wrong. But the conflict starts this way. As they neared the subdivision, countless Tyrannosauruses danced up through the concrete sheeting ahead of them, looking like a geyser of muddy water. All the houses on the slanting slope of the subdivision heaved up their roofs and began to move. The Triceratops had risen. The fighting began. Before their eyes, a Triceratops, head lowered, charged forward and plunged sharp horns into the carotid artery of an attacking Tyrannosaurus. And then it goes from there. But it's not really clear, okay, who started this? And then later, when there's all these just dinosaur bodies everywhere, there's like an ocean of blood and gore covering the subdivision. The father and son kind of look into the faces of these dying Tyrannosauruses and Triceratopses, and they can almost see the Tyrannosaurus saying, "If you eat that crud, why'd you kill us?" These plant eaters. Why did they? Why did they kill these other animals? And then the Triceratops seems to say, "If there's too much to eat, why did you keep on butchering us? Didn't you have enough of our bodies to feed on?" It's not a condemnation of one side or the other. Although, of course, in conflicts throughout history, yeah, sometimes there is an aggressor and there is an evil side, but that's not what this story is about. It's not specifically calling out one conflict or taking one side of a conflict to task over and against the other. What this story in particular, I think, is trying to do is showing in general how that type of conflict gets out of hand. And it does it in such a way that you have the T-Rex and the Triceratops fighting, but I think because Kono Tensei associates one specific Triceratops with the house of the father, the son, and the mother, it's kind of like putting them in the battle and having them.
That's our Triceratops.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like putting them in the conflict, but without being so on the nose or on the horn, I guess you could say in this case, that you actually have your main characters as the aggressor in a conflict. It's again very subtle, but I think for that all the more powerful in such a short span of words.
Indeed, warfare is a sort of an unwholesomeness, and a force that everything is susceptible to, and it kind of takes hold of everything and everyone, and wreaks all this destruction, and then the survivors, are just left with unanswered question with unanswered questions about it. You know, it's all true what Kono Tensei wrote. That is exactly how it happens.
And there's that interplay too between what is permanent and what is transient. This Triceratops is a beautiful, amazing, powerful creature that shakes the earth, but they're not here anymore. They've been destroyed. Now we're here, right? And we have our city, we have our neighborhood, our house, our family, our television. Um,
Or fashionable white slacks.
exactly, exactly. But fabric falls
Can't forget
apart.
those.
Exactly.
Can't
I've got
can't
I've got
can't
mine
forget
on. I don't
those.
I don't know about you fellas, but you missed the memo. But yeah, and tonight it's the skimpily clad Eurasian girl on the television, but tomorrow it'll be another show. Maybe she loses, in the song competition. Um, and
Yeah,
uh,
and it's one of those things like it can either point to a kind of thankfulness that that we're able to have these kind of peaceful time, but we can put our interest into those things, or it could also be a bit of kind of looking at it and seeing, if this is what it was born, if this is what that time was born from, like how are you going to use it? Like
mhm.
it can work both ways. It doesn't really try to push, one or the other, but
Yeah.
just kind of presents it to you as this reality.
And that's kind of summed up in the last lines of the story. We take a step back from this carnage, and then you see just what's going on in the city, right? The woman in the fashionable white slacks, the microbus filled with kindergartners passing through the landscape, and then the elementary school student singing a jingle, which closes the story. Skylark dancing to the sky. God is reigning in the sky. The world's a trifle. And um yeah, there's that kind of final note of, yeah, we're all here and this all seems pretty permanent because this is our lives, right? We're bicycling through this place, but it might not be here forever. And
All
Right.
all flesh is grass.
yes, and I think to a Japanese reader especially, thinking about what had just happened, 30 years prior, this story has a lot of references to just kind of the town that it's in and the environment, and it's yeah, the city seems pretty permanent, but so did Hiroshima, so did Nagasaki, and they were wiped out like that. And so you have, I think, yeah, kind of that recognition that yeah, this is our life, this is what we have, but like the Skylark flitting back and forth, kind of all the work that we've done and the things that we fill our days with, yeah, they're not guaranteed. Not for tomorrow, not even for, the next moment, the next breath. Whether you want to say the default state of corrupted nature or whether you want to say just kind of as a very live option and possibility, conflict and devastation and war, these things do come. They have come before and taken out mighty beasts, and we're not so elevated above that it couldn't happen to us on some level.
And that's another beautiful thing about this story, where it deals with the contradictions, the interplay of these cosmic things of life and death, of peace and war, of beauty and destruction. But it, at the end, in a very, just those last three, four, 3 to 4 lines, the author gives us this beautiful grace note where he takes us beyond even that with the song, right? Where beyond these, these seeming permanence and the destruction or the overturning of that permanence, beyond those two, you have the act of making meaning out of it all,
Right.
which is what this kiddo's doing with the song at the end, which is it's powerful and it packs a wallop. Just those last few very beautiful lines. The Triceratops is grand not only because it's grand in itself, but because of how it's remembered, how it's perceived by people. And in that sense, it living in the sense of in the dreams, living on in the dreams of people and the creatures that linger, that are still here. In that way, it hasn't left, you know, and never will, hopefully. You have these major themes of life, death, and fatherhood, and all of that. And then at the very end, you have the note about art, the place of art and storytelling and song and poetry, and how that even that it's big enough to wrap itself around everything else.
Yeah.
And
And
Wonderful stuff.
unintentionally, like the
Hmm.
student doesn't see all this. Well, I don't think she sees all this destruction around it, and I call her she. I don't know, doesn't specify his gender, but it just kind of struck me as a little girl. But they don't see all this destruction, but they're singing this song that just happens to encapsulate everything that our protagonists have witnessed.
yeah.
Quite
And
unintentionally, art can do that.
right. Yeah. And I don't like we said at the outset, I don't know anything about Kono Tensei, his beliefs, his work. Certainly in I think Japanese culture, like biblical themes and Christian ideas aren't exactly mainstream in the same way that they are here in the West. Although you do see them crop up here and there in interesting places, certainly. But I couldn't help thinking of Ecclesiastes, the vanity or impermanence of all these things that push to look not under the sun but beyond it. God is reigning in the sky. The hope that we have is not in simply looking to ourselves, looking to our nation, our culture, and finding ultimate meaning or ultimate purpose or ultimate hope in those things. And in that sense, you may think that the story is kind of cynical. Maybe Kono Tensei himself is cynical about those things. I don't know. I would guess probably, considering the bulk of the story, but I think because of that grace note and because of sort of the warmth and kind of tenderness of a lot of the story, it's hard for me to come away from the story and not think about those things. Think about having one's eyes pointed upwards, looking toward ultimate meaning, looking towards hope, looking towards something that is permanent and that won't pass away, that won't, be ripped to shreds in the next evil conflict. And thinking along those lines too, of course, I can't help but think of Job either, right? Right. Of Behemoth and Leviathan, how these things seem so mighty, and yet ultimately they are nothing compared to God.
There is plaything, like a pet,
Yes.
I think it's described as.
Hmm.
But you also have, in the story anyway, you have the living room, the most intimate place where the living room, the TV, and the family dinner, and then you keep expanding from that to the bike ride home or the trip to work, and then from there even you have and then you have the dinosaur, of course the neighborhood, from there the neighborhood, and from the neighborhood the country, and the country you have the dinosaur, and from the dinosaur you have the cosmic fight between them, and from there you have the seeming permanence, and they seem so permanent when they're here but then they go so quickly, and from there you have God. You keep reaching out where it ends with God, but each layer is its own layer of meaning.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
from the
it's very much
Skylark to the whole world.
that's right. It's very much a Jacob's ladder effect, I think, where each step is required in its own way and necessary and lends itself seamlessly to the other. And of course, we know, from not to play act as a theologian or anything, but from the Christian's perspective, we know that God himself knows not only, there's our ascent, but he knows the descent into all of that, and how he himself, God himself, was torn to shreds as well,
Hmm.
and then ascended again and carried us all, descended into our grisliness of our existence, and then ascended back and carried us, to carry us up there with him, and once again, and I keep saying, but more compliments to Kono Tensei, because he may not have, like the child who's singing the song, unaware of of what our main characters are seeing with the destruction. The author, like in all other authors, he may not have known that we would reach these conclusions, right? But because there's so many conclusions and lessons and blessings and wonders that can be drawn from the story, I think that's all to his credit. That's all to
Yeah.
this author's credit.
Yeah, I think that's just what happens when you write a story honestly. You have clarity of vision. You're not sort of trying to sort of shoehorn the story into doing one thing, when it needs to expand and become more than that. And I think, yeah, there's so much truth in the story that Kono Tensei was intuiting and aware of, that it does have a kind of universal application, starting from this very, like David Hartwell acknowledges, this kind of sort of small scale magical realist lens. Yeah, it does kind of expand to the level of the cosmos and beyond.
I wanted to mention something that struck me about the story that I liked a lot was, kind of like Phil mentioned before, there's so many stories where the children find some magical thing and then they have to convince the adults. And yeah, so you've got the father and son together, and then it's not about them trying to convince everyone else, which is really nice. And then, I was kind of, there was in the back of my mind, there was this fear that, uh-oh, they're getting in a bit too deep. And then that last section starts with the description of the day starting, like, I don't know, descriptions of blood just in general. And it's like things are gonna get pretty dicey.
Right.
Are they gonna be running from some T-Rexes pretty soon? But it didn't go that way at all. Um, the worlds remained sufficiently separate that it wasn't some world changing revelation on any level of interfering with their lives. It just expanded what they were aware of in a positive way. It even kind of the sense I felt that the last sort of reward for them for being willing to imagine that this is real and accept what they're experiencing. First, they see the Triceratops briefly, and then they see it at night, and then they see more and more, and then they see the great big battle, and at the end when it's like, and they could almost hear the T-Rex saying this to the other, and then they could almost hear the Triceratops responding. It's like that's the last step of their awareness being open, that they can even understand what these animals are communicating to each other. But yeah, it just kind of felt like it wasn't about interfering with their lives. It wasn't about transforming them as people in any strange or negative way. But it kind of just felt, it kind of had a bit of an Alice in Wonderland feel. The Triceratops is the white rabbit, and they discover this other world, but at the end everything's okay. It just is that way, and it's expanded our ability to imagine the different times in ourselves as much smaller on certain scales. Ultimately, God's scale, God is reigning in the sky, and everything's going to be all right. So that was some of the sense I got from the end that I really liked.
That's great. That it kind of opens up in that way. That, yeah, it's not a change of heart that the characters have, but it's a deepening of their understanding. At first, they're not even sure if it's a Triceratops. Then they're identifying what it is, and then, yeah, as you pointed out, at the end they're kind of guessing at what they might be thinking. Um,
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of maturing going on the part of the child, which and the father too, which is rather understated. Like I don't, it doesn't show like a big kind of revelation where the kid says, "Well, now I know that." It doesn't show anything like that, but I imagine that something like that is going on in his mind, just having seen all this, that he's witnessed this incredible wonder and also this incredible horror, and now he's going to take that with him for the rest of his life. Even though he himself was kind of like unscathed, he and his family were unscathed by it. It reminds me actually a little bit of this anime from Gundam of 0080 War in the Pocket, which is also from the perspective of a child. And he kind of starts out like he likes, he kind of likes the military, he likes the tanks and especially the big robots, the mechas that do battle. He's very interested in all those things, and he kind of plays them in his video games. And then, throughout the few episodes, it's like 6 episodes, I think. He sees what war is like. He sees the damage it does and the evil it does, and at the very end, they're having this tribute to the fallen heroes, or the fallen soldiers at their school, and he's the only one who's crying. Like all the other students, like they don't understand. They're just kind of doing what they're doing because of the ritual, but he gets it. And I figure something like that has gone on with this child in this story as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's a kind of an older it's not a father-son story, but yeah, the soldier that the boy befriends in Gundam 0080. It is kind of a little bit of that older younger friend dynamic there too. Although the relationship is different, but
That's another good. It's a sort of cozy sci-fi story. Like there is violence in it for sure, but that's another good one if you haven't checked it out. The Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket.
yeah. Well, gentlemen, this has been a fabulous discussion. Thanks so much for reading the story with me and joining me at the Beagle and Child to hash it out. And I feel like just over the last hour, my appreciation for the story, which was high to begin with, has exponentially increased.
Like a skylark dancing to the sky, one might say.
Indeed. Yeah, so thanks so much for that. And to you joining us at the Beagle and Child, I do want to add if you enjoyed our discussion here today, please do subscribe. We are on YouTube. We are on X as well, 707 Press. If yeah, you like the kind of stuff we're dishing out, we also have a literary magazine, Fathoms. We just released our first issue. You can purchase it wherever fine books are sold, as long as that place happens to be the same megalithic website where you probably purchase toothpaste. Anyway, it's up on there in Kindle edition and paperback. You can read essays and stories from all the people on this episode, Henry, Phil, Nathan, and myself, as well as the other members of 707 Press, Nick Manchester, Alex Atanzi, and Devin Williams as well. We're on Substack, 707 Press. You can pick up some of our stories for free there, as well as essays and poetry. We're all over. So please do check those out and support us. We'd greatly appreciate it if you enjoyed what you heard here today. Anything else, gentlemen, before we sign off?
I just want to say this was a wonderful time, and I'm already looking forward to the next one.
yes.
Like what?
All right. Take care, everyone.